So just to say, shush, stop talking, everybody. And listen to Rebecca. Duncan, shush. Rebecca, over to you. It's really good to have you here, although not here, but here in person. And we're just going to shut the door because Rocco, you can probably hear, is joining in. I'm going to put the camera on, I'll put the phone on, the microphone on mute, so speak to us.
Great. Morning everyone, and thanks Giles and the Environment and Social Justice Committee for inviting me to come and share this morning. I can't actually see who's there, but if there's anyone who doesn't know me, my name's Rebecca and I've been attending St John's for about 3.5 years now since I moved to London. And this morning I've been asked to share a little bit about what I do at USPG. USPG stands for United Society Partners in the Gospel, and is the Anglican mission agency that partners churches and communities worldwide in God's mission to enliven faith, strengthen relationships, unlock potential and champion justice. I've worked for USPG for just under 5 years now, and I currently work in our global relations team, holding responsibility for USPG's relationships with Anglican churches in East Asia, Oceania and Europe, as well as supporting our Peoples in Mission programme. St John's has a relatively intimate relationship with USPG, I think it's fair to say. As a long-term and committed supporter, churches like St John's are really deeply cherished by USPG. But in addition to this, St John's is also the home for a number of us who work and volunteer with the society. And so this community itself and its commitment to justice sorry, is something wrong?
That's right.
He's asking you to speak more slowly.
Okay, the echoes.
If you could just speak a little bit.
Fair enough.
Because it's very echoey in here. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, so this community and its commitment to justice and community is also a rich sustenance and inspiration and challenge to a number of us who serve USPG. So this morning, I know that we hear quite a lot about USPG from a number of people. So this morning, I'm hoping to share something a little bit different. I'd like to share a bit from my personal perspective about a few of the initiatives that I have the privilege of accompanying in my role. But also, I'd like to share a little bit about why I'm passionate about World Mission and the work of USPG in particular. And so in good old kind of Anglican fashion, I've got 3 points. So I was going to talk a little bit about mission as being holistic and contextual, one about mission as fellowship and relationship, and finally mission as being transformational. So global mission is holistic and contextual. So founded in 1701, USPG holds very deep and long-standing relationships with Anglican churches across the world. And it's through this trusted family network that alongside our sisters and brothers in Christ, we strive to see God's love in action across our world. And what this looks like is incredibly varied because USPG listens to and accompanies the mission priorities of the local church. And it is this role of accompaniment in humility that really drew me to USPG initially. It's the continual and mutual process of action and transformation as we engage in God's mission together. So USPG understands mission following the 5 marks of mission of the Anglican Communion in a very holistic manner. So proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, teaching, baptizing, nurturing new believers, responding to human need by loving service, transforming unjust structures in society, to challenge violence of every kind and to pursue peace and reconciliation, and to strive to safeguard the integrity of creation and renew and sustain life on earth. And whilst we often see these as 5 separate or delineated points, they are so deeply connected. And when we see mission in this holistic manner of addressing multiple marks of mission at the same time, we can just see how significant it is in the lives of individuals and in communities. Unfortunately, this can often make talking about mission both deeply exciting and deeply challenging, because And it's my belief that we're called to be missional people. If we're doing life right, it kind of means that absolutely everything that we do, every conversation that we have, should be missional and contributing to God's mission. But this can make things quite difficult when people are asking about specifics. So that's kind of spoken a little bit about the holistic nature of mission that addresses spiritual, emotional, social, practical, physical needs all together. And both addressing needs and the structures in which those needs have emerged. And secondly, this holistic mission, from kind of my perspective or the work of USPG, is also deemed to need to be contextual. So justice to me, living in Woking or in London, might mean something quite different to the idea of justice held by our brother or sister in another part of the world. And so if we're working as a global family, who gets to choose what is just? And who gets to choose what the response of God's people in that place is? And I think sometimes for me, being in London and growing up in the UK, this can be something that's quite challenging, because I think I've grown up in a place where I'm used to having the answers. I'm used to being told that we are world leading and know what to do. And actually, it can be very challenging as an individual or as a church, I think, to move into a place that enables us to appreciate the plurality of equally valid perspectives. And it requires transformation in all of us to acknowledge that we by ourselves do not have exclusive access to God, and that our vision of God is limited on our own and can be enhanced and improved as we learn about God from others. And we also know the value of context deeply, I think, from our life here as a church in St. John's, because it's only through being embedded in our broader community, immersed in the life and in the pain and the twists and turns of our community here in Waterloo, that we can respond most appropriately with love and courage to our reality here. And that to me is justice not only in the causes that we seek to support or the issues that we want to draw people's attention to, but justice in the way that we work and operate. And I think that the church holds a very unique and special place in this, along with other places and communities of worship. It holds a very unique role in living out justice in our communities, because it is within the community. It's a part of the living, breathing dynamics of its neighbourhood, but it is also connected far more broadly, nationally and internationally. And it's because of this that it can act and respond in a way that so few other bodies and organisations can. It can provide a deep, holistic care that responds to spiritual, emotional and physical needs of those it reaches out to. And I think that we often undervalue the role that the church plays in its local communities across the world. I'd like to illustrate this with a piece of work that I've engaged with over the last 5 years with the Church of England's diocese in Europe. And hopefully this is quite an appropriate example as we remember World Refugee Day today. So in 2015, USPG began accompanying the Church of England's diocese in Europe with a particular response focused on supporting refugees in Europe. And if you will remember back to 2015, stories from Greece and Italy and across the continent were hitting our news streams on a regular basis. And this is not the case anymore. At that time, USPG were invited by the church to accompany them, and particularly the Anglican Church in Greece, as they looked to reach out to those within their midst. And the ministry of the church in Greece was catalysed, who is a true servant leader and has been an incredible inspiration to me and a number of other people that he has met, or who have met him even. By 2015, he'd been serving the church in Athens to respond to the injustices that he was seeing in his community. Now, to give a bit of context, the church in Athens is very small. There's probably about 60 people that worship there regularly, and it's a very diverse congregation. People often gather in chaplaincies across Europe because it is the English-speaking congregation, and so there were multiple nationalities, and a church that probably one might say was in deep need itself. As you can imagine, within Greece, The needs were great, and also to have such a crisis within Europe was relatively unprecedented and provided additional challenges as international bodies like the UN and NGOs were needing to negotiate what operating within a sovereign European state meant. In 2015, things were quite messy, to say the least. And I think that it's within this context that the response of that small Anglican church was truly remarkable. So firstly, due to its long-standing place within the city, St. Paul's Church in Athens was able to convene an ecumenical group that enabled churches and Christian actors across the city to pool their resources and work together, sharing information and connecting people to each other's services. So for example, someone that may have been living in the family safe house that was run by the Jesuit Refugee Service might have been directed over to the Salvation Army Day Centre for clothing and hygiene items. They might speak to the translator that was funded by the Anglican Church, USPG, but based at the Salvation Army to get help with understanding the asylum process in Greece before receiving a hot meal for the day by Caritas or the Greek Orthodox Church. So this network enabled better service provision by those faith actors across the city being able to work together and bring their small offerings, each a piece, into a bigger puzzle. But it also enabled faith actors to better connect with the UN and other coordinating bodies, as well as a space for conversation and a place for those working in the field to discuss a very rapidly evolving context. There were times in Greece in 2015 where European and national law were changing weekly. Borders were closing quite quickly and unexpectedly, and things were changing very fast. So that group offered a space for people to come together, to share information, and to be able to reflect on what was happening and talk it out with each other. So that organisations could help each other to strategize and to work out what was going on and to get accurate information to those people who were receiving services from them. But above that, it also created a real fraternal group that were able to support each other, both as organisations and as individuals. And so many people at that time, as anyone that's been in a place of crisis will know, were working tirelessly in traumatic and deeply complex situations. And so a space of fellowship and prayer enabled a kind of pastoral and social support for those who, and a number of whom did reach burnout during that period of time, to come together and support each other. And the clergy at St. Paul's are continuing to offer a pastoral and a listening ear for many of those still working in the area to this day. So alongside the formation of this ecumenical group, St. Paul's was able to channel funding to a number of ecumenical partners and long-standing Greek entities and organisations that had a very strong and intricate understanding of the context in Greece. And this ranged from providing accommodation, education and legal support for unaccompanied minors, to supporting equipment for search and rescue teams on the coasts of the Aegean Islands, to the provision of emergency medication in a number of the camps that emerged on the Greek islands as well. And as a trusted member of the community in Athens and in Greece, the church was also able to reach communities that were unable to be reached by other NGOs and entities. So, for example, it ran a programme within a number of detention centres in Athens for those who had been detained. And this was a place where no one else was able to reach, but the church, because of its history, because of its long-standing care for its local community, was able to have access to. And on top of this, the church was able to use the full gifts of its congregations and the connections with the broader European diocese. So the international nature of the congregation and their language abilities enabled direct support with a number of asylum requests and family reunification cases, particularly with Germany and Austria, where members of the congregation were able to provide translation skills and also connect with people on the ground in Austria and Germany itself. And so to me, this was just an incredible expression of how the mission of the church embraced such the variety of gifts of the many members of the congregation, as well as their connections, their skills, and their networks. And it both epitomizes how a contextual approach to mission, one that is so embedded in deeply understanding the place in which the service of the church is existing, as well as being holistic in caring for every person spiritually and emotionally and physically, just is quite an incredible demonstration of that. And so, in my opinion, this is why the impact of the church's mission can go far beyond that can be offered often by professional NGOs. And that's not to dismiss the work that NGOs do. I think we're all part of a kind of jigsaw puzzle offering different, playing different roles, but coming together in the end. But I do think that the church offers something that is different and distinctive and enables this holistic care of the entire person. And I think that one of the things that I've learned from working at USPG over the last 5 years is how to not underestimate how remarkable the impact of a single congregation can be, and the impact that the church can have on its broader society. So as quite a short update on the context in Europe at the moment, the situation has changed, but it is no less severe. European asylum policy remains deeply unfair. There are limited means to safe passage to places of safety, and people continue to risk their lives. In addition, people are still living in inadequate and informal camp settlements in the Greek islands, in northern France, and in cities across the continent. Issues including depression, PTSD, and self-harm are increasingly emerging as byproducts of the hopelessness and despair of those who remain on the move. And this is not to mention the increased risk that COVID-19 poses to those in inadequate accommodation without sufficient hygiene items. But once the news cameras and the large NGOs have moved on, the church remains, and it continues to adapt and serve those around it. And as USPG, we continue to support a number of chaplaincies across the diocese in Europe as they respond to their local context. So that's one piece of sharing that I'd like to give you this morning. I'd like to briefly talk about a couple of other things. Hopefully you're still with me. Can I have a thumbs up if that's still okay? Great, thank you. So I'd like to talk briefly about mission as relationship and fellowship, because at USPG, and something that I just believe very strongly, is that as USPG, we long for churches of the Anglican Communion and people within those churches to enter into a deeper and richer fellowship with each other. We believe that through encounter with each other, we're exposed to greater perspectives of God, and that as a global family, we can strengthen and encourage each other. And I think that we often underestimate the power of our relationships and being with each other. And this is something that I love about the approach that USPG takes and working for a mission agency that puts relationships right at the heart of all that it does. And one brief example of this is a kind of initiative that we engaged with earlier this year with the Nippon Seiko Kai, which is the Anglican Church in Japan. So you may remember the 11th of March in this year was the 10th anniversary of the Great Eastern Japanese earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear disaster. 10 years ago, when the earthquake struck, it was the most powerful to be recorded in Japan. And official figures have indicated that just under 20,000 people were recorded dead from the event, and a further 2,500 people remain missing. The tsunami that was caused as a result of the earthquake caused the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power station to go into meltdown. And it's been a very deeply significant nuclear disaster of recent times. Around 500,000 people were displaced, and 10 years on, hundreds of thousands of people still remain away from their homes or in temporary or permanent accommodation. As a mission agency in partnership with the Nippon Seiko Kai, to mark the 10th anniversary, we were invited to join them and the Anglican community in the UK for a number of joint prayer gatherings and services to commemorate and remember the anniversary. We were asked to be with the church, a ministry of presence in this time of remembrance. And sometimes I think that there is power in our mission of just simply being together in solidarity. Sometimes we need space to sit in silence and in grief and in prayer. Sometimes our events are too heavy. Reality is too difficult. And there is simply a great spiritual power in our relationships and knowing that globally our ongoing challenges are not forgotten. In sitting together in prayer and in remembrance, we are also entering into a dialogue of remembrance and warning. As a member of the UK, sitting in silence with those grieving the loss of their lives and their communities as the result of a nuclear meltdown, I, and I hope others who were also part of those services, entered into the advocacy of the Nippon Seiko Kai, who dream of a world without nuclear power and without nuclear weapons and without nuclear disasters. As they share their grief and pain that has come from the pride of humans believing that technology can have unlimited positive power over the natural world, we heed their warning and we enter into a ministry of theirs that hopefully resonates with us and we bring back to our own communities. So sometimes I think that we forget the power that comes in our conversations and in our spending time together and in our prayer together. And actually we can see justice in our world through being with each other. So my final point and the kind of final thing that I'm really passionate about in terms of working for USPG and being involved with USPG is how mission can be deeply transformative. And both the experience of working with Greece and what I've just shared about our time of prayer with the Nippon Seiko Kai speak into this as mission as transformation. Because I think that this is one of the real challenges of engaging with God's mission, because something is expected of us. We have to be willing to change as a result of our encounter and engagement with others. What we experience and what we hear and what we pray for has to sink in and it has to change us. And so I'd like to hope that as an individual, my encounter with people who challenge me, who speak up in times of real personal damage to themselves, who reach out and continue to help those who they meet, even when they're nearing burnout and don't have a huge amount of resource themselves, challenges me to continue to do that in my own life. But I also think that we have to see this and our global relationships as a deeper challenge of transformation to our communities here in the UK. And one of the things, and this will be the thought that I kind of leave us on because I've spoken for way too long, is so often when we talk about justice and we talk about advocacy, we are reminded of a passage in Proverbs that asks us to speak up for those who cannot speak up for themselves, or be a voice for the voiceless. And we see this as an instruction to advocate on their behalf. And what I've learned over the last few years of engaging with a number of churches across the world who maybe sometimes we like to call voiceless or like to advocate on the behalf of, I've learned to actually be quite critical of this passage. And I'm not to say let's not speak up, let's do that, let's speak into the channels of influence and change that we have power in, let's shout love and justice from our rooftops, but let's also question the idea that God has created voiceless people, and ask ourselves, why are people unable to speak for themselves? And in the phrasing that we heard so much last year with the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement, what or who is suffocating these voices? And actually, how am I suffocating the voices of my siblings around the world? And for me, this is the kind of core part and power of engaging in global mission and approaching justice, which is the requirements for self-reflection and transformation. That transformation that occurs from being in a deeper relationship with God, creation, and people across the world who are facing different challenges from ourselves. We're challenged to change our own behaviour. We're challenged to look at where we hold power and where we can give that power up in that spirit of humility that I mentioned at the very beginning. And so as I kind of conclude here, I personally just feel very grateful for my engagement with USPG and for the communities around the world in which the networks of the society enable us to engage with more deeply. I've had the privilege of walking alongside people who are true servant leaders, who put their lives on the line for justice and the rights of all of those in their community. And I continue to be challenged to love more radically. And it's my prayer that I never take this for granted. And so if anyone sees me doing that, please hold me to account. I feel very fortunate to do a job that allows me to stand for God's love and justice in each day of my life. So, and it's a huge privilege to do it. So that's quite a place to end, I think. So I'll open it up for questions, and Duncan can also answer anything that he would like to.
Very, very many thanks, Rebecca, for that. You've given us much to think about. We couldn't hear everybody, but I think were you reading from a script? Have you got the words? Or is it read through exactly that? There's lots within it. But I think to really take away what we allow ourselves to change. And I was listening to something yesterday where they said, if you want to change the world, you have to change yourself first. And that's crucial in our lives. So much to think about, much to reflect on, and really good to hear your experience. But now, questions. Yeah, any questions? If there's a question online, then just shout, or if there's a question, building. Shannon.
Thanks so much for that, Rebecca. And my question is about people who have a voice, us interrogating ourselves and wondering why they don't have a voice in the first place. So a bit of a long question, but maybe this is how I can illustrate it. So if we've been to St. Paul's Cathedral, we will see that there are statues all around the cathedral that celebrate the mission of the church, the legacy of the church. There is a statue that disturbs me a lot in St. Paul's Cathedral. It is one of a former bishop of India, and he is blessing two sort of native Indians in rags, and he's there towering above them and blessing them. And you know, when we're thinking about what that image is surrounded by, it's surrounded by images from the Gospels, right? When Jesus is doing his mission of social justice. But this one statue of the Bishop of India, I think, is moral legitimacy for the British Empire, for British colonization of India. And it infantilizes the Indians that, you know, were supposedly saved by the mission of the church. That statue was actually commissioned by USPG, which is the predecessor organization of the USPG. I mean, from what you're saying, I completely agree. I think I love the relationship that we have with USPG, and I think it takes. So I'm just wondering, refugees. I'm just wondering what you feel. I mean, you're passionate about working with the USPG, but how has this storyline made sense to you? You know, between USPG's past and its present, and is it worth questioning that past of USPG, even as we celebrate the good work that it's doing now?
Thanks for that question. I'm going to answer it from a very personal perspective, and if you want an organisational response, I will divert you to Duncan. I think the point that you've raised is entirely the conversation that needs to be happening, and personally, it's also one of the reasons why I stay committed to USPG, because within the staff team and within a number of with the conversations that we have with global partners, we're not quiet about the past, about the history. And I think one of the questions that we ask ourselves regularly and have asked ourselves regularly, at least according to kind of team members that I've spoken to, over the last 20, 30, 40 years, does USPG need to shut down? And, I think that that's a question that is asked regularly by a lot of people. I think one of the questions I have, and again, I'm speaking personally, not for the organisation, is very much, how do you reconcile? Is closing down and pretend, if USPG was to kind of shut down now, stop operating, does that actually help? Is that a better way to reconcile with our past, or actually is there a role of kind of confronting it and trying to work it out and do others? These questions are not hidden within USPG. I don't think they've been raised quite a bit over the last period and continue to be questions asked. And I think that those questions will be ones that we sit with and hopefully act on in the coming years, in its entire future. It's really important that we don't ignore that. USPG's past, like you said, or SPG's past, is deeply linked to British Empire. But I think that also gives an opportunity, right? Because the UK is trying to work out what to do with its past. That's part of the kind of context that we're sitting in now. So actually, how can the church speak into that? What can the church offer in that? And is shutting down and walking away from the conversation the better approach, or do we actually need to be part of the conversation to understand and learn from the past? Duncan, do you want to say something?
I don't know which way you want me to speak. Yeah. Just here. Yeah. I think it's a tough question for Rebecca to tackle with CEO standing in the room. Really great question, Shannon. Absolutely. My approach is you've got to be honest about your history in all its complexity, and the complexity is really great in this space. I thank you for that reference, because I'd like to check that one out. I'm on a group at Canterbury Cathedral who've gone through all their modules to look at all of these sort of questions on justice. So I think that's a really important thing for a number of organisations to do on the statute side, if you want. And part of that is uncomfortable as the leader of an organisation like that, because there are bits of local, say, SPG this or so I think it's really, really important to own our history. I think it's very important there's some complex aspects to it, because sometimes some of our partners will say back to us, stop apologising and don't be so negative about your history. Let me take you to the graveyards of European missionaries who came out here with their coffins. So, there's some real complexity there, and I think UNCA, which is another part of our history in East Africa, was set up to engage with the East African slave trade. At the same time, it's quite clear it was imperialistic and paternalistic in various parts of its attitudes. So it's really complex all the way around. And I think the key thing is to be open, honest, have good conversations about it. And try and do so, for example, two quick things that will go on and on. I've just employed a global theologian who someone brought up in the Church of South India, worked at the WCC, and part of his job will be to help facilitate some of those conversations and really talk about them. And the second thing is that I've just done an issue of a journal on decolonising theology. And I'm starting from the position of this is who I am, this is where I stand, as it were. And exactly that, we need to talk about history, all its complexity. And that's the way, and part of that movement theology is actually to make space for other voices. You're stepping away, but you've got to actively step away to let other people have space so that they can speak. And when they start to speak, as it were, people at the centre, the white missionary imperial inheritance, start to learn, and start to acknowledge and understand more about the world that they're implicated. I think we're all implicated, I guess is the wrong way of putting it. And being honest is a really key thing. So that's a long answer. It's a bit fundamental, great question.
Thank you. Any other questions? We're online. Well, just want to think we'll take one more after this. But my question for you, Rebecca, you won't be surprised to hear, is when we talk about justice and making sure that justice is part of our mission. As you know, we do a lot of climate. You're very involved in this as well. Can you just connect justice with climate for us?
Yeah, so very simple. Our climate crisis has been caused disproportionately by the behaviour of certain people in the world, and the impacts of it are being disproportionately felt by those in other parts of the world. And it is an example where, as a global body, we need to act together, because whilst it has very local impacts and very disparate impacts compared to, say, parts of the Pacific Islands that are already not existing because of sea level rise, to parts of the UK where actually we've spent a huge amount of money building river defences and sea walls and installing air conditioning and the like, to mean that we don't necessarily feel the impacts of climate change that we are experiencing as a country, because we've already paid to protect ourselves from them. So for me, climate justice transcends mission in its entirety. Firstly, I think that, when we consider our relationship with God, we consider our relationship with the whole of creation. So when we're looking to reconcile ourselves with God, we're reconciling ourselves with each other across the planet and the planet itself, which is by God's divine creation as well. But the inequalities of climate change are a distinct result of the brokenness of these relationships, and I think greed and huge amounts of inequality. So I think that the great challenge for me, and the great challenge for us as a church and as an agency, is how do we balance and ensure that the global response is proportionate to those who have caused the challenge. And I think that that's something that means that places like the UK, who have benefited from industrialization over the last 200 years disproportionately, we've caused a disproportionate amount of the carbon emissions that have caused the current crisis. We need to be stepping up and doing even more. And actually, I think that there's a question of degrowth. To what extent does our lifestyle now exceed what is needed of humans? So I think that that's a real challenge, because it will require, again, huge transformation of our communities. And I think as a global mission agency, this is something that we take really seriously. So for the last, number of decades, we've been spoken to by global partners about the impact that climate change is already having. It's not a future issue. One of my kind of sticking points is people that like to kind of say, well, it's great we've got a future generation and children are really talking about this. Sorry, this is like a bee in my bonnet. I just think it's going to be too late. We can't leave it to children in the next generation to fix this. It really is urgent, and it's now, which is why I think being part of St. John's is a really great community to be a part of, because St. John's is doing stuff now. But my point is that actually USPG has been engaging with churches and parishes in the UK for the last 7 years to get them to use their political voices and the power that they hold within Parliament here to really make the larger structural changes. So as a result of the pleas from our global partners, about 6 years ago, we started working with a group of 6 Yorkshire churches who started a movement called Hope for the Future. Hope for the Future is now one of the UK's leading climate communications charities and does a huge amount of work work with MPs to really push the climate change agenda and action, political action on the climate crisis within the UK. And so as USPG, we know that, you know, this isn't something that we can leave to those around the world. It has to be action here as well. So and that was one of the first times we've had kind of projects and initiatives within the UK. So I think, I don't know if that answers your question, Giles, but it transcends everything really, doesn't it?
It does, and there are obviously real connections between the refugee crisis and the climate crisis as well. So it connects with the other part of the work we were talking about. And just to say, I'm not sure that everybody knows that we also host Faith for the Climate, which is an overarching umbrella organisation which brings together more different faith groups like Hope for the Future and USPG and Christian Islamic Relief Team Action. That's based here. I'm the chair, Travis the director, but we have a really kind of crucial role in engaging nationally and supporting faith groups across the country, which is really very much a part of the whole network of organisations, which includes your tremendous work. Now look, it's 12:30 p.m. and I think we need to let people go get for lunch, but are there any final questions that you've got? I suppose listening to you, what I'm thinking, and I'm looking to Doug and Tricia, who's supporting the USPG, is that we've never had a partnership, proper partnership with USPG. We've supported you over many years. But I just wonder if we should talk about maybe trying to form it with a particular church somewhere. I think that would be good for us, but obviously, so, should we just, can I just leave that with you? I think the people where we should go to something a little bit creative. Would everyone, does everyone think it's a good idea? Yeah. Yes, I've got thumbs up. I'm looking to Joao, as the chair of the Environmental Social Justice. Yes. Yes. Okay, good. So let's talk about that. So, thank you, everyone. I think we just need to let